For any Iranian pilot to get into the F-14 program, he had to have 1,000 hours in either the F-4 or the F-5 to even get in the program. But it was obvious that you know, they were never going to have a squadron as good as our squadron in tactics and understanding, etc. They were going to be good enough to fly those things and fight them against the Iraqis and other people. You know, that would be fun, but not against the United States.
412, receive my navigation now from the position direct. It's on the depth 154 with the farming throttle 290 and a heading 145. Jet 154, 1 confirm your request please, level please. 330,
After the end of '72, I had a set of orders to go to test pilot school. I went to Pax River because in 1967, 68, I was working at a company called Sunstrand, and I was the senior applications engineer on the design of the wing sweep system for the F-14. And I happened to be giving a presentation to Grumman the day they announced on their PA system that they'd won the competition to build the F-14. So I went to Bob Smythe, who was the chief test pilot at Grumman, and I said, hey, I got to fly this airplane. And he said, well, he said, you're in the reserves. He said, you haven't been through test pilot school. He said, I recommend you go back on active duty, go to test pilot school. It's a 6-month course. They require you as a 1-year payback, 2-for-1 payback. So you got to be in flight test for a year. And he said, I don't need anybody right now anyway. And he says, by that time, I'll be looking to hire some more test pilots, and I'll hire you because of your engineering background and the fact you worked on this airplane for the last 2 years for us. I'll hire you. So that's how I ended up back at Miramar. Bob Rasmussen said, he's not going to go to test pilot school in F-4s, he's going to go to the RAG. But now I'm on my way to test pilot school finally. I get there, and the Navy's already got the F-14 at Pax River testing it. I graduate from test pilot school, and because I'm now a senior lieutenant commander, they said, hey, we'd like you to go be the head guy on fighter flight test out at Point Mugu, and you'll be in charge of doing all the F-14 weapon systems test fly, which is where I went. And I'd been there about 2 years, and we're doing the V&V, as we call it, validation and verification of the new tactical software that was going into our fleet F-14s. And that was the first production tape, as we call it, that we loaded into the weapon system. At the same time, the Shah of Iran bought, through however he got around to doing that, bought the F-14, bought 80 F-14s. And so one of the tasks that we were given, myself and my people, were to develop a tape for their weapon system. It was kind of detuned. It didn't have all the electronic countermeasures and countermeasure stuff in it that we had in ours. At that time, they were good allies of ours. You know, the Iranians were good allies. We had, you know, the United States government had put the Shah back in as the king, or the Shah. And so, you know, with Iraq being Iraq and the Russians being the Russians, you know, they had F-4s and they had F-5s. They had, you know, 1,000 F-4s and probably that many F-5s, and our tanks and surface-to-air missiles and everything else. I mean, they were one of our strongest allies. And so it didn't really bother me that they had them. I never once thought we'd ever be fighting them, you know, F-14 to F-14. We flew over to brief the Iranian Air Force guys and the Grumman and Hughes people that were going to be loading it and maintaining it in the test equipment and the aircraft. We went over to brief them, and then somebody said, "Oh, wow, as long as you're going over there, why don't you take 2 of their deliverable airplanes with you?" So we flew an 8-hour flight from Bethpage to Rota, Spain. And then we flew another 8-hour flight from Rota, Spain to Isfahan, Iran, into Hatami Air Base. We were the first 2. That was ship 3 and 4, 3rd and 4th airplane that was delivered to the Iranian Air Force, into Hatami Air Base. And we were the first ones to show up at Hatami. It was a brand new base built in the middle of nowhere out in the desert. And we're taxiing into the front of operations, and they stopped us in the throat of the taxiway. And they got a band and a bunch of troops and a bunch of civilians over there, and they bring this goat out, and they sacrifice this goat right in front of us on the taxiway. And John, who's this grizzly old Marine that's got like 10,000 hours, of 8 of which is in Korea during the war, he goes, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just saw that." And I'm going, "Hey, you know, it's their Air Force. It's that way they bless this whole thing. We are all right. We are the good guys." And so I was there, and I had to go. We briefed them, and then they invited us up to Tehran to brief all the powers to be in the Military Advisory Assistance Group, the MAG as they call it. And there was an Air Force general by the name of Dick Secord. You probably heard that name, Iran-Contra. He was the new guy up there, and he said, "Hey, get up here and tell me all about this thing. You need to tell me all about the F-14. And the F-14 fell under him as the Air Force advisor because it was in the Iranian Air Force. And the Navy advisor had nothing to do with the F-14 program. So I briefed him. I went home. And about a year later, maybe not even a year, I get a call from the Chief of Naval Operations and says, "Pack your bags. You're going to be the new commander of the F-14 program in Iran. You've been requested by the Air Force General." And I went, what did I do to tick him off, you know? It turns out that Whitey Feitner was part of that whole thing, that they had to have a senior officer over there with a background in the F-14 that really knew what was going on, and who was, you know, a grizzled old flight instructor as well. For any Iranian pilot to get into the F-14 program, he had to have 1,000 hours in either the F-4 or the F-5 to even get in the program. And, you know, you got to remember that they speak Farsi, and everything that we taught them was in English at the direction of the Shah, because the Shah wanted everybody to be very fluent and understanding of the English language, because he wanted their Persia, as they called it, to take their place again in the important communes of the world, because at one time they ruled the world. And so his whole goal was to, you know, bring Iran back to the table with the United States, Germany, Russia, and everybody else, be equals. But it was obvious that you know, they were never going to have a squadron as good as our squadron in tactics and understanding, etc. They were going to be good enough to fly those things and fight them against the Iraqis and other people. You know, that would be fun, but not against the United States. I went over there in February of '77, leaving Point Mugu in the F-14 program, And I stayed there as the commander of the team, the group there at Hatami Air Base until April of '78. And I was brought back to the Naval Air Systems Command in Washington, D.C. to be the director of foreign military sales by Admiral John Albus. In September of '78, I was part of a program review in Iran. So the admiral, my boss, and 2 or 3 other admirals and a bunch of people went over there for a program review. The end of August, first part of September, there was what we call progress payments. Every month, the government of Iran would write a big check for millions of dollars on their contract to buy the test equipment and the aircraft and pay for the manpower and everything else that was over there supporting this program. And they missed the payment. And so technically that's a default on a contract between the governments. And so we went over there with that in our back pocket, and we come to find out there's a bunch of problems going on over there relative to unrest in the troops. It was kind of like they were drafted for 7 years, and then when they were supposed to get out, they weren't letting them out. And that generated a lot of hate and discontent. And it looked like things were not good. So we came back to the States. That was the last time I was in Iran. We had some 500 civilian contractors for Grumman, Hughes Aircraft, Pratt & Whitney, Nawasi, North American Worldwide Services, down in Isfahan. Funny thing, I was with the Admiral, and we were having our program office Christmas party down in Alexandria for lunch, and I got a call from this guy that was part of the Defense Intelligence Agency guy in the embassy in Tehran. And I was briefing with him a lot when I was over there. And he calls me up and he said, hey, Hot Dog, I need to have you come talk to us about Iran. And I'm going, okay, next week or no? He says, no, right now. I have a car that's going to pick you up in 15 minutes, be there. So I go up to the Pentagon and I find out that things are really coming unraveled, and they want me to evacuate all of our people from Isfahan. And so we started the process right then and there in evacuating the 500 people that we had down in Isfahan. We had something like 40 or 50 just involved with the F-14 program. And probably not that many, probably 30 people in Tehran that were a part of that F-14 program. But we started that evacuation issue right then. Then, as everybody knows, the Shah left the country in the first part of '79. Khomeini came in, they had a revolution, and they stormed the embassy, I think it was in October of '79. I had 2 F-14 guys in the embassy when it was stormed. Commander Don Scher, and unfortunately I can't remember the other guy's name, but he was from the technical support side from Philadelphia, that were there in the embassy for the whole duration. I had fought to keep them in the United States when they were back in, they were in my office, I think in June, and I told them to go home because they're not going back. I'd already gone through the evacuation. There's no sense in sending 2 guys back over there again. And about a week later, I got a phone call from a 4-star Air Force general at Sinkyur asking me who the heck I thought I was. They worked for him and his people, not for me. And we had a little argument about that. And he said, well, you got 24 hours to send them, or I'm calling up your boss and let you deal with him. And that boss he was talking about was the chief of naval operations. And I thought, boy, I don't want to put my boss in trouble. So I went and talked to him, and he said, geez, you know, send him. We don't need a battle with the boss. And so reluctantly, I sent him back over there on the Air Force MAG's call, and they ended up being POWs. Not good.
General White was the commander of the Flight Test Center. He asked me if I wanted to take over the F-15 program. And so naturally I agreed quickly. And as I said earlier, before we started this, I had been at Edwards for 3 years already. And so I spent another 3.5 years doing the F-15 program. So this was in the summer of 1970. And then the first flight was in 72. So I took over 1 year before first flight of the F-15, and I had it for 2 years after that. So I was the first Air Force pilot to fly the F-15. And we did a lot of evaluations as an Air Force of the F-15 early on. The situation with the F-15 was designed strictly for air-to-air, so it had great turning capability. In fact, one test point I had was a 5G accelerating turn. So you're going around and around at 5 Gs. And then it gets to be very difficult. The difference between what the F-15 could do and like when they went operational in 1974 and what the F-4 could do was the fact that the performance was so much greater as far as climb, turning, acceleration, all the performance parameters. Now the analysis people that in the Pentagon can analyze the expected performance of all the Russian airplanes. And they show part of the envelope where the two compare, favorably or unfavorably. And the F-15, compared to all the data we had on the Russian or USSR airplanes, the F-15 was far superior. They have what they call P sub S, which means the excess energy that you have in a given flight condition. And the F-15 was far superior in all categories of performance. Now, the thing that I haven't mentioned yet, the F-15 had such great radar systems. When we were talking about the radar in the Korean War, even the F-101, the radars, the F-15 was such that you just push your little joystick over here, and it would lock onto an airplane. It would give the information of what that other airplane was doing, its number of Gs, airspeed, everything. So it was, the avionics was far superior. The F-14 and F-15 were entered service almost at the same time. They tried to fly it earlier and beat us, but when they lost that airplane, that was a little bit later. So the two were being developed almost at the same time. And of course, there's always the controversy that says which airplane's better. So after I'd flown the airplane, I don't know how many hours I had, it was in the fall of 73, a Navy admiral and an Air Force general decided that we ought to evaluate these two airplanes, not against each other, but have a test pilot evaluate the capability of the other services airplane. So I was going to evaluate the F-14, and a Navy pilot, test pilot, was going to evaluate the F-15. And the ground rules that we had was very specific. we write an analysis of what we think of the airplane that we're evaluating. No comparison between the two. So we did that. And I flew about 15, 16 hours, I guess, in the airplane. I had my own backseater, and we did a full evaluation. So we got to go to the Pentagon and evaluate the results. So George White, who was the Navy guy that flew the F-15, gave his report, and I gave my report on the F-14. And the first question from 4-star in the front row was, how do they compare? The answer had to be diplomatic. And the answer I gave was that the F-14 is designed for long-range missile, the Phoenix missile. The F-15 only has short-range missiles and medium-range missiles, which the F-14 always had. So for that mission, for fleet defense, the F-14 was better for that mission. For what the Air Force mission was, the F-15 was far superior for that mission. And then, as an aside, to be able to go aboard the carrier, you're about 15,000 pounds heavier than the F-15. So the performance is lacking because the thrust of the engines, the F-14, F-15, were almost identical in afterburner. After we got through briefing all the generals and admirals, then the Armed Services Committees of Congress wanted to get involved. So both George White and myself got to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committees. And they wanted to know all the nitty-gritty about how the airplanes compared. And they weren't interested in anything politically. They just wanted to, how did they compare? And so we kind of had to answer their questions. We couldn't take the fifth with them because the admirals and generals didn't want any direct comparison of the F-14 and F-15. But we got to do that to finish up that part of the program. Now, the other part of the F-15, as I left, began to leave it in 1974, which is 2 years after first flight. We flew from Loring, Maine to Bentwaters, England, non-stop, unrefueled, which no fighter has ever done that before that. Of course, Lindbergh flew across his little Spirit of St. Louis. But for a fighter, you always had to have tankers or go the northern route where you went across and made all your stops in Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland, and that sort of thing. But we flew nonstop from Loring, Maine to Bentwaters, England. And that was associated with the Farnborough Air Show in 1974.
I think the thing that I like the most about the F-14 is that it's just a beautiful airplane.
You see it fly, you see its wings forward, and you see it sweep aft through the loops. The fighter techniques that they use, we call ACM environment, is just awesome. It's just something you cannot ever forget. Credibility means an awful lot to an F-14 guy. We do what we say we're going to do.
I don't think people are ever going to recognize till 20 years down the pipe everything that we did in the 90s and 2000 with an airplane that wasn't designed to do the things that it's doing with.
And every time I see an F-14, I always say, there's my jet.
I've got a great team with a great bunch of individuals who would do extraordinary things to make things happen.
When I come out for the air shows and I see an F-14 thundering by, I still get a chill. I love it.
We caught lightning in a bottle.
Through the years with the F-14, I don't think we found any challenge that the F-14 couldn't meet. It excelled in every role.
If you can scare someone away with just the looks of that aircraft, it's me.
As I see this aircraft coming in, I thought that maybe there was something wrong with it because the tails were going this way and that way. In the Phantom program, the tails were locked together, so we thought for sure the aircraft was broken.
The first time I saw a Tomcat, it was like looking at a Klingon warship or something. It was, it was just such awesome technology.
And to watch that aircraft just zoom by in the sky, just looked beautiful, it looked so natural, the movement.
The F-14 is the most powerful, sexiest, coolest, sleekest, fastest muscle car ever built.
The idea for the F-14 was born in the 1960s. The F-111 was supposed to be the next Navy carrier-based aircraft, but there were issues about landing the big plane on a carrier deck. So the Navy decided they wanted the perfect replacement, an aircraft that had air superiority like the F-4 Phantom, air-to-ground capability like the F-111B, and dogfighting superiority to protect the carrier against Russian aircraft.
The original engineering design team that Grumman put together were brilliant to come up with what they did.
Once we saw what the airplane was capable of doing in the proposal, it was just incredible. And then when you saw the first prototype rolled out, it was such a thing of beauty.
The Tomcat first flew at the Grumman facility in Calverton, New York, December 21st, 1970.
I remember the first flight of the aircraft. I was on the roof of one of our plants watching it take off, went once around the field, landed, everything went smooth.
On its second flight, December 30th, 1970, Tomcat No. 1 experienced a hydraulic failure and crashed while on final approach to Calverton. Both crew members survived.
The program almost died when aircraft number 1 had the hydraulic failure on its final approach back to Calverton.
And after that, it got the moniker of being the ill-fated successor to the ill-fated F-111B.
Probably in today's world, where everything is very success-oriented and we can't tolerate one error, one mistake, it probably would have been canceled in today's world.
Grumman initiated an extensive hydraulic redesign to fix the problem and get the F-14 flying again.
We ran 24 hours a day, and in my mind I can still hear the two electric drives that we used for the motors. They were called vari drives, whining as the frequencies changed up and down, and we surveyed all the various frequencies. And it was a real big to-do and very nerve-wracking. In the end, we had made quite a few changes to hydraulic lines and hydraulic line supports, and I believe we gave the Navy the confidence that they wanted in the aircraft.
We all like to put out 125%. We spent a lot of time to give the Navy a good product.
The 1970s was a big decade for the Tomcat. By 1973, Tomcats ready for combat had been delivered to the U.S. Navy. Fighter squadrons could now put this impressive aircraft to work. The 70s also included the first black F-14, the selection of the F-14 as the aircraft of choice by the Shah of Iran, and the Tomcat providing air cover for evacuees leaving South Vietnam.
F-14s came off the assembly line and had their acceptance flights at Calverton. Further structural analysis was done on F-14 prototypes at Calverton and the Naval Air Station at Patuxent River, Maryland. And Tomcat fighting capability was infused into test aircraft by a contractor, military, civilian team at Point Mugu, California. Grumman Aerospace Corporation integrated the F-14 avionics weapon systems. Hughes Aircraft Company tested the completed weapon control system, and the Point Mugu Naval Missile Center supplied contractors with facilities and equipment and provided laboratory space for the integrated systems.
I came out for a business trip in April of 1971 and then had the pleasant experience of flying a corporate plane out here later on to bring out all the first instrumentation equipment to integrate it in the sitz frame.
Civilian software and hardware engineers at Point Mugu prepared for the highly technical work on the F-14.
You
had to have an organization that could be responsive to the fleet, that wasn't tied up in contractual issues, that would make it so that we could get new technology integrated into the aircraft.
A complex support system began to take shape at Point Mugu. The F-14 Systems Integration Test Station SITS Lab became operational in 1971. The lab was a complex performance simulator built around an F-14 fuselage containing a full suite of avionics, fire control, and electronic warfare systems.
The instrumentation system on the number 5 aircraft was designed to test all the avionics. And so there were many different types of circuitry that had to be designed. We integrated that into one large unit, brought it all up to SITS, and then you had to go one signal at a time to test out all of the different signals.
The SITS lab allowed the F-14 team to test all aspects of each aircraft.
It's much easier to and cost-effective to have a frame in a lab where one can easily have access to equipment, one can easily make changes without having to do it on the flight line on a live aircraft, because it involves a lot of manpower, a lot of work, a lot of cost.
The SITS lab approach was unique and instrumental in the Naval Missile Center providing integration support for the F-14.
The real neat benefits of Point Mugu is we had the engineering personnel, the software personnel, contractor support.
Although F-14 software was not nearly as complicated in the 1970s as it would become in the 1990s, computer throughput still posed challenges as engineers wanted to gather data and process it in real time. The goal for F-14 weapon integration, software or hardware focused, was fleet success with the aircraft. The SITS lab could be reconfigured many times in a day to test different capabilities.
Before any test flight took place with the radar or with the missile, there was in a very advanced laboratory, and the first time this was used to the extent that, at least in the 1970s, where you tested fully all the components of the weapon system before you placed them in the airplane.
As F-14 weapon system integration support solidified on land, the first squadrons, VF-1 Wolfpack and VF-2 Bounty Hunter, took their place on Navy carriers. As fleet pilots got current on the new high-tech F-14, Tomcat test pilots at Point Mugu continued to push the envelope with missions the fleet pilot might face in combat.
On the F-14 program in particular, and basically the programs at Point Mugu, they use the test air crew as project officers, and you do a lot more than just test the system. You go to design reviews and figure out what the air crew really want, and then there's a really incredible relationship between the project officers and the engineers who don't have the operational experience, and the engineers would come into your office and ask you questions, and you'd explain how things work in the fleet, and a lot of times you just see the light bulb come on for them, and then therefore they can make the right design decision.
The test pilot's job is to weed out potential problems before an aircraft flies a new capability in the fleet. The job is challenging and can become dangerous. In 1973, F-14 test pilot Pete Purvis fired an AIM-7 Sparrow missile during a test flight off Point Mugu ranges when something went wrong.
Well, we fired the missile, and the first thing that Pete called was, "Hey, Tom, the missile went funny." That's not the exact words he used, but it was close. And then the back end of the airplane became an enormous fireball. Well, Pete pulled up because the higher altitude you go, the less oxygen there is. He was hoping to extinguish the fire. But he didn't get very far, and the fire burned through some control rods, and the airplane went out of control.
The backseater was able to eject both himself and the pilot safely.
They landed, they were in a raft for about an hour. They were picked up by helos, came back. They were fine, they were on our bowling team that night.
Sparrow technical issues were quickly solved. With software changes the team made, a patch tape fixed the Sparrow problem.
It literally took them one day to find it when they were told what to look for, and then a couple days later to come up with a patch tape.
Then, in 1974, the capable Tomcat gained the attention of the Shah of Iran. 79 Tomcats were delivered to Iran. But before the Iranian F-14s became fully operational, the Ayatollah Khomeini took power. The potential threat of F-14s in the wrong hands was avoided. Without U.S. maintenance support, the F-14s never were able to fly for the Ayatollah. In the 1970s, the Navy created a black F-14.
And that was called Vandy 1. They wanted to use it for nighttime operations, low light level operations, different type of scenarios. Now Vandy 1 is the airplane that generally the skipper of VX-4 would fly. Now it's VX-9. And that F-14 flew up until 2004.
With its AUG-9 weapons control system, the F-14 could detect airborne targets at ranges of more than 100 nautical miles, track 24 enemy targets at one time, and attack 6 of them simultaneously. That led to the famous 6-on-6 missile shot, successfully demonstrated by the Tomcat at Point Mugu.
There was this lieutenant that was Officer of the Year, and there was a congressional committee here, and he had a chance to interview with them. And he asked one of the congressmen or senator, I forget which, why is it the Navy doesn't test their aircraft and weapons to the capability that the contractor advertises? And the congressman said, "What do you mean, son?" And he says, "Well, this airplane's supposed to be capable of shooting 6 missiles at 6 targets." And he said, "Well, why don't you draw up a plan and send it to me?" So the lieutenant did, much to the chagrin of the command. And that was the start of 6-on-6, but it was a great program.
6 Phoenix missiles, fired from the F-14, attacked 6 independent targets. 5 of the 6 scored a direct hit.
3's in the air. 4's in the air. Check the target cameras. 5's in the air. 6 in the air.
The 1980s gave me one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I was off the coast of Beirut with Bob Hope and his Christmas USO tour in 1983 during the Lebanese crisis. We knew that the Navy had lost a couple of aircraft to enemy fire earlier that year. But the sound of those Tomcats flying overhead during our stay with the 6th Fleet gave us complete confidence, not to mention an exceptional show. What a thrill to meet the Tomcat pilots that were providing protective cover for us. Also in the 80s, the F-14 became a celebrity in its own right, starring in its first movie role, along with, of course, Tom Cruise in Top Gun. The F-14 Tomcat and the Navy's elite fighter pilot school would become household words. During the 80s, the Tomcat got a new engine and solidified its reputation as the supreme dogfighter ruling the skies.
In 1981, Omar Gaddafi sent 2 Sukhoi Su-22 fighter jets to take on a couple of United States Tomcats during what has come to be known as the Gulf of Sidra incident. The F-14s were cleared to return fire and registered the first combat kills for the F-14 aircraft. Admiral Van Lett was a radar intercept officer on one of those Tomcats.
Looking between the tails, watching Larry Muzinski chase that fitter over the Gulf of Sidra, and then seeing the smoke trail of the AIM-9L come out behind our airplane and realizing that Hank Kleeman had just squeezed the trigger and let one fly.
After that confrontation, it was US 2, Libya 0. The Lebanon crisis followed in 1983. The U.S. lost an A-6B intruder and a Corsair to enemy missile fire during the first few days of the operations. F-14 support teams worked around the clock to give the Tomcat the ALQ-167 jammer pod to protect the aircraft in the event of further skirmishes.
Well, the class desk officer called out to Point Mugu. It was late in a Thursday afternoon, and he said, "You've got to get a Point Mugu developed ALQ-167 jammer pod on the F-14. You've got to do it quick because 2 airplanes have already been shot down. We can't afford to lose any more aircraft. Well, we got together a Point Mugu team, a Grumman team, a Navy team, civil servant team, worked through the weekend. By Tuesday of the following week, the Navy was flying with this new configuration. F-14s were fired at, but not one was ever hit because of that ALQ-167.
In 1989, Tomcats faced 2 of Gaddafi's MiG-23 floggers. The air combat sequence lasted over 6 minutes. The end result? US 4, Libya 0.
So that was the total dogfighting experience of the F-14s forever. The fact that the F-14 wasn't challenged is really the legacy that the F-14 has. Nobody would take it on.
We never let them get close enough. The nice thing about a Phoenix missile is you don't have to let them get close.
Besides the F-14's starring role in Top Gun, an F-14 pilot, Punk Brewster, is featured in a book adventure series by author and former F-14 radar intercept officer Ward Carroll. Carroll's experiences in the cockpit mirror the F-14 community synergy.
What makes it a venue that lends itself to movies or books is 2 guys in the airplane. You can see the other guy and he can see you. And what was rewarding over the long haul about being in the F-14 community was it was a partnership between pilot and Rio, an equal basis, each bringing what he does to the equation. You need talent in the front seat and you need talent in the back seat. And that really did keep me in the business and keep me excited about flying the F-14.
F-14 teamwork has always been a part of F-14 history.
I'll always remember the people. It'll never get as good as it is today.
The F-14 community is absolutely the best place to be in the Navy. There's no better place to be. The people here are the highest caliber that are out there. The maintainers that we have working on the aircraft are unbelievably knowledgeable. These guys are putting in, 45 to 50 man hours per every flight hour that we get to fly. They're the hardest working people in the Navy. They are the salt of the earth.
I think we are not afraid to walk over to one of the other members of the team and say, you know what, we've got a problem and here's what I think the problem is, and communicate what that is so that we find the best solution or the best resolution to that.
And it was a marvelous program. A lot of really dedicated people on all sides.
The F-14 team also focused on giving the fleet the biggest bang for the buck.
We manage our money to the dollar. We know where it's going. We did more with less than anybody else.
The ability to work in that environment and provide for the fleet required tremendous leadership and creative thinking on everyone's part in the teams.
Dedication to the fleet is a common thread that binds the F-14 team. An example of this happened early in engineer Jerry Dean's career. It was Christmas time and Dean was requested by the fleet to fix a nose gear that had collapsed on an F-14.
It was an enlightening experience because once I got out there, I said, well, if we had the right parts, we could replace this. And the skipper of the squadron was like, son, we didn't ask you to come out here just to replace parts. He said, get out your little piece of paper, your books, your slide rule, whatever you need, and whip me up a repair. So he sent me down to my room. I worked up a repair, and we had some parts made, worked with the artisans, and we had those installed on the airplane. About 3 or 4 years later, that airplane came through, went down to check out the repair. Safe, sound, still operate until they retired the aircraft.
Serving the fleet's needs led to high-tech upgrades for the F-14. The F-14B and the F-14D would give the Tomcat capabilities that solidified its position as a top performer for the 1990s and into the 21st century. The upgraded F-14B had a new engine, the GE-110, which added the power and response the fleet was looking for. F-14B pilots also enjoyed greater situational awareness with an improved avionics system. The F-14D took advantage of F-14B improvements and then some.
Now, the F-14D took the engine that was introduced for the F-14B in 1987. It had the ALR-67, but what it also did was it brought in a digital architecture with programmable displays, a super advanced radar with twice the capacity and twice the distance. We still had all the same missiles before, but now they had a tremendous improvement in performance because they had a much better weapon system to work with.
With the sophistication of the F-14D, the Weapons Systems Support Team at Point Mugu faced new challenges. How to gather the thousands of signals of information on the aircraft, from fuel levels to weapons system release information, and make the data useful in real time for testing purposes. In typical F-14 can-do spirit, the team developed dynamic, real-time data collection processes that worked.
One of the big problems was to take 28,000 signals that the aircraft basically had available and telemeter all of them, basically record all the data. Now, at the time, no one was doing data reduction of that sort in real time.
Like when we were doing, getting ready for the data reduction, when we had guys that worked here all night long.
Software became really huge. It was large in the F-14A, but it was very limited to number of processors that we could control.
The F-14D upgrade included a new APG-71 radar system, an airborne self-protection jammer, infrared search and track, and the Joint Tactical Information Distribution System.
The F-14D implemented the JTIDS terminal, the Joint Tactical Information Distribution System, and when it implemented, it was the only fighter aircraft in the Navy inventory that had this system. The F-14D altogether, from software development, hardware, to what the fleet actually received, we delivered a big bang for the buck.
F-14D upgrades also included the digital flight control system.
It's been a very good upgrade in terms of improving the flying qualities at high angle of attack and also improving the flying qualities in the landing configuration in back of the ship, and has really helped out in maintenance and troubleshooting of the flight control system. It's a very satisfying job.
In the 1990s, the Tomcat became a Bombcat, adding a new laser targeting pod system to the Tomcat called the Lantern. The initial flight of a Lantern-equipped Tomcat was on March 21, 1995. The Bombcat had finally come of age. The Bombcats flew sorties over Bosnia, acting as the forward air controller for Bosnia airstrikes. The Lantern Bombcat participated in Operation Desert Fox, with airstrikes conducted against Iraq. The Bombcat saw more combat in the NATO air campaign against Serbia over Kosovo in the spring of 1999, flying hundreds of sorties.
The integration of the Lantern pod, low-altitude navigation and targeting infrared for night, would change the course of history for the F-14. But there had been an initial hesitancy to convert the F-14 from air-to-air to air-to-ground missions.
The atmosphere of the community was they were air-to-air. They were fighter guys. They didn't want to be air-to-mud guys. Needed to have an air-to-ground capability to have a mission in the current environment and the current conflicts we were fighting.
We basically made the F-14 a Bombcat. We started flight testing it. I had some aircrew that weren't looking forward to doing some of our testing. These guys were used to being, 30,000 and above, and always having all the room they needed to do all their maneuvers. And what am I doing diving at the ground at 45 degrees, and you tell me what? You want me to release this at what altitude?
But when the Lantern-equipped, fully integrated F-14 Bombcats were ready for the fleet, a whole new world opened for the F-14.
My most important contribution to the F-14 program was being a member of the Lantern integration team and providing a precision strike capability to the F-14, which really breathed a new life into the old cat.
Somebody had the foresight back in the early 90s to strap a lantern pod on the Tomcat so that we had some ability to do precision guided bombing. And now the Tomcat is not only an all-weather fighter, but we are also an all-weather bomber and a precision bomber. So we can provide multiple roles for the carrier air wing as a air-to-air fighter and also a air-to-ground bomber.
Even while putting the punch into the Tomcat, the F-14 team always put the safety of the pilot and crew first.
Better, faster, cheaper. You hear that all the time. Well, that's great, but naval aviation is in itself a risky business. Safety is number one.
It's a personal thing for me, and it's the goal for everybody in the Mains Department.
I think the best thing that makes dogfighting an F-14 really special is the way that you have control over this airplane like no one else. Pilots in this airplane have direct control over a weapon system. You're not influencing a computer or telling a computer what to do. You're flying an airplane, and you're putting everything you've got into something and making it work. And that airplane gives you feedback to exactly what it's doing, not what a computer's doing, or not what, you're not a voting member in this airplane. You're the driver.
Landing an F-14 on an aircraft carrier is an interesting proposition. It's a big airplane. It's great to fly behind the boat. The power response is excellent. It's really exciting to come aboard in an F-14.
It's a Rio-centric airplane. A lot of what happens in the airplane occurs in the back seat. You feel like you're on top of the world.
By the 1990s, the future of the F-14 had been decided. The last F-14 came off the production line.
Everybody believes that the last F-14 ever built was built by Grumman. And that's wrong. Because this was an APN-1 funded project and it was considered new production. Technically speaking, just technically speaking, the last new F-14 rolled off the line in Norfolk.
It is with pride and sadness that the F-14 community faces the 21st century. Soon the last F-14 will be retired from the fleet. The last F-14 has already departed from the NAVAIR Weapons Division at Point Mugu and the NAVAIR Depot at Jacksonville. No more wrenches will turn on F-14 fuselages. No more weapon systems upgrade to be made to the Tomcat.
The equipment that's in an F-14 is very maintenance intensive, and that's primarily why the F-14 community is drawing down early now. It's an airplane that's got a lot of intricacies and things that you don't really find on a lot of airplanes these days. It's its own unique beast, so to speak. It is what we call a truck. It's an airplane that'll fly its heart out for you.
Although approaching its retirement date from the fleet, the Tomcat continues to make its mark. And one of the finest achievements brought about by the F-14 team also happened in this decade. In a whirlwind of activity and teamwork, the final software system upgrade was made to the F-14 in record time, allowing the Tomcat to play a pivotal role dropping precision-guided joint direct attack munitions in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
With 3 F-14B squadrons on 3 different carriers participating in Southern Watch, this meant putting together a team of engineers, technicians, and air crew to assist with installation of new hardware and software, and also to conduct personnel training. Point Mugu got the call Friday to make the JDAM integration happen.
I got a call from the PMA saying we want to put this out in the fleet now. And I said, what do you mean by now? They said, well, we'd like your people in Puerto Rico Monday morning. I got on the phone and we made that happen.
I would stay behind and be available by email. I was online with them day and night, and this was no longer preparing for testing, preparing for dry runs, this was, I knew, preparing for the real thing.
We managed to put the capability in 3 F-14 squadrons, F-14D squadrons in a very short period of time, and give them a capability that they didn't have for dropping JDAMs, multiple JDAMs on targets.
the war effort started, and on the first night, F-14Ds were dropping JDAM in Iraq. So it was very rewarding to see that from the start point of launching the team over there to do that, and then actually squadrons employing new weapons.
During Operation Iraqi Freedom, a team consisting of NavAir's Kevin Morse and Navy Top Gun instructor Lieutenant Commander Keith Rex Harrison went into northern Iraq. Their job was to assist Special Forces in directing precision-guided JDAMs on target.
And we were in the mountains, about 1,000 Americans, 125,000 Iraqis. And where we were, we had 2 aircraft carriers supporting us.
It was amazing to watch the F-14 Tomcat community lead the show during that phase of operations too, specifically in northern Iraq, where they were so critical to the survival of those guys on the ground. So I was teaching those guys on the ground, how do you interface with that air component up there? What do you need to do to have that air component successfully drop a JDAM weapon on the target you're looking for?
And we would coordinate the aircraft with targets on the ground and drop bombs on them. And at the same time, provided imagery to the ground guys, so when we had to go to across a bridge, we had to know if the bridge was still there. We didn't know what was guarding the bridge. We liberated some cities, and it was a very hard trip.
And finally, a toast to the F-14 Tomcat and all those who flew it and fixed it and supported and admired it throughout 30-plus years for a time period that spanned 5 decades.
All the people that I've worked with, it's just, you know, when I think about it, I think of their faces and I think of the accomplishments and the satisfaction they've had flying the airplane, coming back from good missions, and then all the test work and all the people that have said, wow, we got that done, we didn't think we could do it, but it happened and it's a great thing. So it's the people that I'll always remember.
The first model airplane I ever built, it turned out to be an F-14. That was back in 1972, I believe. So it was right after the airplane entered the fleet. And then to go through college and come out and end up working here and working on the F-14 was just a great experience for me.
The one thing I won't miss is the people. It is a fun program to work for. We were always in the forefront of technology.
It's basically an ending to a wonderful experience that I've had and one that I'll truly never forget.
It's been my career for as long as I can remember, certainly longer than anything else I've worked on. And I just love it.
It showed a lot of the newer generation that, yeah, you can get a little romantic with an aircraft, but at the same time, when push came to shove, it can go out there and get the job done for you.
The Navy decided to mount an F-14 outside the gate, and it was just so nice that we have a plaque out there with some of our names are on it, and it's just the one monument that I'll probably ever have in my life, but it certainly makes me feel proud.
What I'd like to say to the team is thank you for all the support and all the help and all the teamwork and working together over the years. The support for the fleet and for the United States and, you know, and for me personally. It's been great working with everybody over the years.
If I can sum up my personal and professional feelings of the F-14 in just one word: awesome.
Will go down in history as one of the greats, and it'll probably rank up there with the Spitfire and the P-51. And I'm very proud to have been part of the Tomcat life.